Okay, and you're live.
Good morning. We'd like to welcome you once again to Leslie's live streams here at Gulf Specimen Marine Lab and Aquarium. And if you're new to these live streams, we'd like to welcome you. Thank you very much. And if you've been with us in the past, we're grateful for that as well. And we've recently uploaded several of those live streams onto YouTube. So if you missed them and you'd like to see them, check out our YouTube channel. And we're also very excited because on Monday we are going to be reopening on a limited basis. If you are interested in coming to the aquarium, you need to phone and make a reservation. We'll be practicing CDC guidelines and social distancing and special cleaning requirements for the aquarium. So that involves limiting the number of people and how long they can stay here so that we can make sure that we're keeping a safe environment for everyone and everyone who'd like to come. But anyway, we want to get to our topic for today, which is seahorses. And everybody loves seahorses. They are just among the most amazing little creatures you will ever encounter. And unlike some of the things that we have covered in the past, seahorses, we believe, are relatively new to the ocean world. They've only been around, we believe, for 3 to 6 million years. And we believe that they have developed from a group of fish called the tube-mouthed fishes, and that includes pipefish, coronetfish, trumpetfish. But this group of fish, family of fish, seems to exist primarily in tropical and temperate waters. And the seahorses are a very highly modified pipefish. But essentially all of these fish have a real tubular mouth. They're all kind of ambush predators. They kind of drift in the water and wait for the prey to come to them. Now they are so unusual looking that oftentimes people don't realize they're really fish. And they have fins and gills, and unlike most fish, they don't have as true a scaling pattern as you're used to finding in fish. Instead, they have these bony ridges that you can see that ring the body, and that helps protect them against predation. They're very territorial and they're very slow moving. Males maintain a territory of around like 10 square feet. It's really tiny. And they tend to stay there. Females have a territory that's about 10 times that big, and probably because the females are going to be looking for more males. Reproduction in seahorses, as most of you know, is very different and very unusual. The female produces the eggs, but then she lays those eggs into this little brood pouch on the front of the male. And she lays anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500, some species maybe 2,000 eggs in that brood pouch. And the eggs will develop and are protected by the males until they hatch out as tiny miniature little seahorses. And there is an opening to the brood pouch that once the young are mature and ready to be birthed, the male goes through almost a real labor. And you see the whole brood pouch contract, the opening dilates. It's very strenuous physically, in order for the male to then give birth to those little seahorses. And there's also some recent research that indicates that there is a connection between the bloodstream of the male, the father, and the bloodstream of the developing embryos that's almost very similar to a placenta-like connection, which allows him to give nutrients to the developing young as they're developing inside the brood pouch. And then once that development is complete, then tiny little seahorses about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch long are birthed into the world. Now, I want, if possible, to get a shot of this little fish over here. This is the pipefish, and this is the organism that we believe seahorses evolved from. And they're usually inhabitants of seagrass beds or places where there are plant-like colonial animals where they can hide in amongst that material and look for prey in the form of, they like to eat copepods, they eat little things called mysid shrimp. We have a hydroid colony inside here that has little skeleton shrimp that are feeding on the hydroids. Skeleton shrimp are a real bizarre, strange looking little amphipod. And the pipefish and the seahorses feed on that. But at some point in time, this strange vertical swimming that you see in seahorses began to take over, and you can see there are only 2 fish that really swim vertically, seahorses, and then there's a little fish called a razorfish or a shrimp fish that is found in the Pacific that hides in amongst the spines of sea urchins, and so they swim vertically. But when this guy swims, this little fin on the back, the dorsal fin, undulates back and forth, and then he has 2 little fins right in behind the gills here on the sides of the horse-like head that help him turn and brake and give direction to the swimming. Now, they don't swim as often as you might think because they have this prehensile tail, like you might find on a monkey, that wraps around seagrass beds, or in this case, a little soft coral skeleton. He's like stuck in there. He's going, let me out. But anyway, that anchors them in place. You don't find seahorses out in the open ocean where they have to deal with a current. They're going to be in shallow, protected waters, in amongst the seagrass, in amongst the soft coral colonies, in amongst the colonial plant-like organisms where they can hang on to things and where they can feed by just kind of drifting in amongst that habitat. And when a little copepod or a little mysid shrimp comes by, then they can feed on that. Now, there's another little seahorse down here. You can see the larger one. In Florida, we have 2 species. We have the larger one, Hippocampus erectus, and this is a smaller Hippocampus erectus. But we have one that's called a dwarf seahorse that's usually, even at full growth, is about the size of that smaller seahorse, and the head is shorter, the snout is shorter, and they are both found in this area. The dwarf seahorse is fairly common in parts of the Caribbean and in parts of Florida as well. But this one is the one that is far more common, and this one is found from Nova Scotia all the way down to Uruguay. So throughout the east coast of the United States, you are likely to find these little guys. Now, they're also very, very good at camouflage, and although they can come in different colors, they do have the ability to like lighten up to match the surroundings. They can even grow little tendrils that may make them look more like the environment, and those might be reabsorbed later. And but they will try essentially to blend in with the surroundings as best they can, and that is directed by nerve impulses back and forth between the little pigment containing cells and the brain. Okay. Now, I hope you're able to see him feeding, because every once in a while you'll see that little snout dart out there, and essentially they're sucking in food, kind of like you might suck in on a straw through that long tubular mouth. I know many people, when I give tours to the aquarium, a lot of people are surprised that they're so small, because I guess because they're named horses, they expected them to be, you know, something they could get on and take a ride on or something. But yeah, they're really surprised that seahorses are actually quite tiny compared to, say, you know, some of the sharks or larger fishes. Now, I also want to point out that they have, like, on the top of their head, they have this little crown-like structure, and each different species has like a different structure up there, a different shape to that structure, and it's one of the things that is used in determining one species from another. There are only about 40 species worldwide of the seahorses, and we believe that they first developed in the Pacific and then later moved into the Atlantic, maybe even a couple of different times. Allison is the one doing all the filming for this set of live streams. And do we have any questions yet, Allison?
Yeah, let me see. Oh, Milligras Pollock. She asked, what species are these seahorses? Are they all the same species?
Yeah, I believe all three of these are the same, and it's Hippocampus erectus.
How do you identify the species?
Oh, no, that's a really good question. It's been so long since I had to key these out. I don't even remember what it asked for in the keys. The number of those bony ridges around the body is important. Size is important. The depth of the head is important. And so if you were looking at a fish identification key, the number of those bony ridges, the overall size, all of those things would be important in determining the exact species.
Okay, where do we get our seahorses from?
Well, seahorses are common in shallow, protected waters, and that's where all of them are found, because obviously they're not designed essentially to deal with open water conditions and lots of current. They have that prehensile tail, which allows them to kind of anchor themselves in place. A lot of them are collected in seagrass areas, turtle grass here in Florida, eelgrass up the East Coast. As you get down into the tropics, they inhabit both seagrass and soft coral. there are areas in the tropics where you have big areas of soft coral development, and oftentimes that's one of the areas where you're going to find seahorses. And that brings me to a point that I really do want to make. I have a little dried seahorse here, and this is one that many years ago was preserved as part of our business here. We did preserve specimens at one point in time, and later it was dried. But seahorses are collected and dried in many parts of the Indo-Pacific and South Pacific, and they are then they're ground up into a powder, which is a part of the traditional medicine practices in the Orient. And as the population of the planet has gotten larger and larger, the demand for some of those traditional products has just really increased. And even though there's no reason to believe that powdered seahorse does what some of those practitioners say that it will do, they're still collected and dried, and people still use them, and that is a big cause of concern, because we are really putting tremendous pressure on these species that, like I said, they don't have a big territory. There are not huge numbers of them to begin with, and when you begin to lose large numbers of the population in an area, it's really going to affect whether or not they're going to be able to recover. So that is a concern, and there are a number of organizations in the world that are trying to stop the use of seahorses in traditional medicine practices, particularly in the Orient.
Okay. Gabriel asks, where specifically do the ones you are featuring come from? Are they local to our area?
Yes, these are local Florida seahorses, and they came from our area.
I think
Northern Gulf, Panacea, Port St. Joe, Panama City area.
We've collected some from Port St. Joe, and when we do like a small dredge, we sometimes get them from like right out here. So yeah, they are local to our area.
We have a lot of seagrass beds in our area, so we have resident populations of seahorses. I wouldn't say they're horribly abundant, but they're
there.
It's not unusual to capture seahorses in our area.
Okay. Rebecca means us. I think it's a daughter. Skyla is wondering what colors there are. I'm wondering how many species we have in Florida.
Just the 2 species in Florida. This one, Hippocampus erectus, and then the little dwarf seahorse, which is smaller. And the dwarf seahorse usually tends to be just dark, kind of brown in color, and it can lighten up some, but it doesn't really change color that much. Hippocampus erectus comes in amazing colors. There are bright yellow ones, there are almost red ones, there are orange ones, there are pure black ones, there are ones that are almost pure white, there are ones like this that show variation in coloration. So they can be very, very colorful, and in an area where they may be living in with soft corals or with sponges, that bright coloration doesn't seem so unusual.
So it depends on what their environment is.
Well, I think they probably have some genetic color specificity, but then they have these little cells that open and close with the pigment in them. Now, what pigments are present, I think, I'm speaking totally off the cuff here. I don't have any data to back this up. So any of you who know, please let us know. But I have a feeling there is some genetic component to what pigments are present in their little chromatophores, the little pigment sacs that they can open and close to change their coloration.
Okay. Ramona, age 3, wants to know if they have names.
Do they have names? Gosh, I haven't named them, but I mean, you know, most people that keep their own home aquarium, I'm sure they have a name for them. Maybe we should ask her what she should name them. Okay. Write us back and tell us what you think they should be named.
Okay, Ruth Devereaux asks, do seahorses have a natural predator?
Ooh, I don't know for sure what eats seahorses. I'm guessing that a number of the larger fish probably prey, particularly on the smaller ones. Once they're adults and they have these nice big bony ridges, I think that there's not, they could bite down on them and it probably hurts the interior of their mouth a little bit, unless they're something that normally eats crunchy things, like some of the drums might eat them. But there's not a whole lot of nutrition, even in an adult seahorse. Lots of these big bony ridges, a little bit of interior tissue, but I can't see that they would be a nice nutritious meal.
I've seen some of our crabs try to pinch their tails before in our tanks. So that might be a predator.
Yeah,
crabs.
It might be a predator. And certainly that they are found in the same area. And particularly if the seahorses, you know, if they're not feeling them, they might be sick with something or getting old, and that could be that might encourage predation.
Brittany Hannah asks, how big? How big are they? Wait, let me put my finger and show you how big they are. They're not too big.
I'd say the biggest one in here is probably around 8 inches.
Yeah, about 8 inches.
If you could kind of
stretch
him
fingers
out from snout to the end of the tail. And the little one is probably 4 inches or so.
Yeah, they're real tiny. Okay, Ruth asks, can you talk about their eyes?
Oh, I can talk about their eyes. They have very interesting eyes because their eyes work independently. It's, you know, when we look to the right, both of our eyes look over towards the right. And when we look up, both of our eyes look up. But in seahorses, their eyes work totally independently of one another. And they can have the left eye look up, and the right eye might be looking down, or the right eye might be looking to the left, and the left eye would be scanning. In fact, you can kind of see it sometimes if you are observing them, because their eyes are, I don't know if you're familiar with chameleons, which are a lizard that also changes color, but their eyes are in these little sockets that turn them about 270 or so degrees, and that gives them a tremendous field of vision. But each eye has a different field of vision, and so they don't really look at the same thing with both eyes. One eye looks at everything on one side of the seahorse, and the other eye checks out everything on the other side.
Oh, Sarah Pardue Thomas, she has a really good question. I think her daughter Nora is wondering if seahorses have a symbiotic relationship with any other creature.
Ooh,
Do they have symbiotic? I don't know.
that is a great question. I don't know of any symbiotic relationships involving seahorses, which is kind of unusual because lots of things that live in the ocean are living in close association with something else. But seahorses, nothing grows on them. I'm sure they have some parasites, and that would be a symbiotic relationship, one in which they probably are harmed in some respects, but I don't know of any commensal or mutual relationships.
Okay, Ashley Walls asks, what's the biggest size seahorse you've ever seen?
There are some Pacific species that I've seen in other aquariums that get to be about 15 inches long, and that's pretty big size for a seahorse. They're, as far as fish are concerned, they're a little more on the small side. I was going to mention that these actually go through like a little courtship during their reproductive cycle, and that they will pair up, and for a couple of days they will practice floating up into the water column, and sometimes they intertwine their tails so that you'll see them in little pairs, and they kind of drift up from the seabed, etc. And they'll kind of involve themselves in this little courtship ritual, sometimes for 2 or 3 days before they actually mate. And mating in this case is the female placing the eggs in the male.
Are they monogamous?
I have read that. But I have also read that that is not the case. And my personal feeling is they are probably not monogamous. That they may stay with the same animal for a breeding season, but I doubt that over several. And if the partner were to perish, then I'm sure they would mate with other partners.
Okay, Sunday Ho asks, how long do they live?
1 to 5 years.
That's not too long.
It's not very long, and some species tend to live only 1 year. Some may live for 3 to 5 years, but they're not a really long-lived species. They're not like some fish or snails that are going to live for decades.
Okay. What do they usually eat?
Well, they usually eat small crustaceans. That's their favorite foods. And in our tanks here, in this bushy growth, which is a hydroid colony, there are little crustaceans called skeleton shrimp that are bizarre little creepers and crawlers through all of this material, and they feed on those skeleton shrimp. The skeleton shrimp are about 1/2 an inch. Sometimes they grow up to 1 inch long, but that's kind of unusual. And they're skinny, so they fit right into that little straw-like mouth. But they also eat copepods, which are a very common animal in marine environments. Copepods are an important part of the plankton. They're like little crustacean cows out there in the plankton fields of the ocean that are grazing on diatoms and dinoflagellates and other algae. And seahorses feed on copepods in many areas. They also feed on a little shrimp-like crustacean called a mysid shrimp or opossum shrimp. And opossum shrimp also have a brood pouch, just like the seahorse. And they're sometimes found in little schools, essentially. And so seahorses feed on those. as well. And I'm sure if there are tiny post-larval shrimp or tiny larval crabs, any of those little crustaceans, I'm sure they feed on those as well.
Okay. Kim Weinrich asks, how do seahorses protect themselves?
Probably their best protection is that they try and blend in with their surroundings, both by changing the coloration and color pattern on the body, but also by kind of just hanging on to a little spot with their prehensile tail and drifting back and forth with whatever's growing in the area. They tend to just kind of disappear into the surroundings, and that's probably their best protection. Their second protective mode is these bony ridges that go up and down the entire body. And so a lot of things that might try to bite down on them, etc., encounter these bony ridges with little spines, and that helps to protect them.
Interesting. And that's it. We have 4 questions.
Okay.
Thank you guys for joining us.
Yes. And join us again, and come see us at the aquarium. Make an appointment.
All right, bye.